Man paid for black woman's coffee after her card was declined. She was a millionaire CEO who... It's not every day you get to witness someone's life change in a split second. But for Camila Santos, that moment came in the unlikeliest of places, a coffee shop. The kind of moment where someone assumes they know who you are based on the surface and makes decisions about your worth, only to find out later that the truth is a far cry from their assumptions. Let's start with the scene. Camila stood in line at the coffee shop like any other morning. A regular routine, grab her coffee and start her day. But today? Today was different. Today, something happened that would change everything for Daniel Kirkwood. The man who stood behind her. It all started when Camila's card was declined. It wasn't the first time. In fact, it wasn't even a big deal. She had been dealing with the frustrating reality of dealing with canceled corporate accounts and other financial hiccups. But this time, it wasn't just the cashier who noticed. The man behind her, Daniel, saw it, and before Camila could even react, he spoke. Ma'am, do you have another card? The cashier's voice carried a hint of irritation. And as Camila felt the heat rise in her neck, she realized that this wasn't about the transaction. It was about judgment. The heat wasn't embarrassment. It was anger, controlled and quiet. It was the kind of anger that came from years of being underestimated, from being told that you weren't good enough because you didn't fit into some narrow mold. At 35, Camila had learned that these moments weren't about her. They were about the people around her. They revealed more about them than they did about her. The corporate card that had been declined wasn't something she could control. What she could control was how she reacted to this. She could control how she carried herself. No matter what others thought of her. Her voice remained steady as she spoke, a calm tone disguising the whirlwind of thoughts racing through her mind. Try this one, she said, handing over another card, her fingers steady, though she could feel the eyes of the people behind her. Another declined. The young cashier snorted. It wasn't a moment of sympathy, it wasn't concern. It was annoyance. A simple, dismissive noise that reinforced the feeling that people were judging her for something they didn't understand. That's when she heard it, a familiar voice slicing through the air. Hey, cashier, just put her coffee on my tab, Daniel Kirkwood said, as though it was nothing more than a casual favor. A generous act on his part. Camila turned slowly, and there he was, Daniel Kirkwood. The man who had fired her 6 months ago. The man who had humiliated her in front of the entire boardroom at Kirkwood Industries. The same man who, just half a year ago, had looked at her as if she were some kind of charity case, someone who didn't belong in the corporate world. She remembered that day all too well. She had walked into that same room with her brilliant strategy to save the company from the brink of disaster. She had poured hours, days, and months into crafting a proposal that could turn things around. But Daniel had dismissed it. In front of the entire room, he had said to her, Camila, sweetheart, you know, we love your unique perspective, but maybe it's time for you to seek opportunities that better align with your cultural background. It was the kind of remark that would stay with a person forever, a comment designed to hurt, designed to make her feel small, unworthy, and insignificant. It was as if the decades of experience she had amassed meant nothing because she wasn't the right fit. In his eyes, the same man who had invented a non-existent corporate, restructuring just to find a way to fire her from the company she had helped double in size. She had been the director of strategy at Kirkwood Industries, a position she earned through hard work and brilliance, and yet, he had taken that away from her with a smile and a few words. A ruthless corporate move, masked under the guise of helping her. But now, here he was, standing behind her in line at the coffee shop, trying to act like the benevolent hero who was going to pay for her coffee. As though that was going to erase everything he had done to her? No, thank you, Camila replied, her voice polite but colder than ice. Double quotes. Oh, come on, everyone's been there. It's just coffee, Daniel laughed, trying to brush off the situation. Like it was no big deal. Like paying for a $5.80 cup of coffee was an act of pure generosity. The same man who had stolen her hard work, erased her name from the history of Kirkwood's success, and now he was trying to pretend he was helping her. He was trying to show the world that he was a good person. Daniel held his Apple Watch up to the payment reader, and the transaction went through. His smug expression didn't falter. He wasn't just paying for her coffee. He was buying the image he wanted everyone to see, the image of a wealthy, powerful man helping a poor woman in need. He wanted the world to believe that he was benevolent and that Camila was simply another person who needed his charity. Camila accepted the coffee, and with a quiet, "Thank you," she watched Daniel walk away toward the executive tables, his back turned to her as though he had done something truly noble. As if his payment of a measly $5.80 would absolve him of the way he had treated her, the way he had stolen from her. But Camila wasn't fooled. She wasn't just another woman in need of charity. She was a woman with a plan, a woman who had spent The past 6 months building something far bigger than the man standing in front of her. And Daniel had no idea what was coming. She could feel the weight of the envelope in her purse. The signatures of investors were there, along with contracts. That would change everything. Everything Daniel thought he had taken from her was about to come back, and this time, it wasn't just about getting back at him. It was about something much bigger. Camille wasn't going to take his money. She wasn't going to accept his charity. She wasn't going to let him walk away thinking that he had done something good. She stood still for a moment, staring at Daniel's retreating figure. He had no idea who she truly was. He had no idea who she was becoming. She wasn't just some ex-employee. She was the future and he was the past, and the best part. She was about to make sure that he would never forget who she was. As she walked out of the coffee shop, Camilla glanced back one last time. She could see Daniel sitting at his table, typing away on his phone, oblivious to the storm that was coming his way. The reality was, he thought he was untouchable. But Camilla knew something he didn't. The moment he looked down on her, the moment he thought paying for her coffee was a grand gesture, that was the moment everything changed. In the corporate world, where power and privilege are everything, Daniel had made the ultimate mistake. He had underestimated her. And if you've ever been underestimated, you know, the real revenge isn't about getting back at someone in the heat of the moment. It's about calculated precision. It's about playing the long game. And Camilla was playing the best game of all. Stay tuned, because what comes next is something Daniel Kirkwood could never have predicted. 6 months earlier, the same room that had held the humiliation and frustration for Camilla had felt different. That day, she had walked into the Kirkwood Industries boardroom with a plan that could have saved the company. The strategy was airtight, a 42-slide presentation that was a culmination of weeks, no, months of hard work. She had poured herself into that plan, running numbers late into the night, analyzing data no one else in the company could decipher. It wasn't just a proposal, it was the answer to the company's problems. The blueprint for a brighter, more profitable future. But Daniel Kirkwood, CEO of the company, and the other executives at the table didn't see it that way. They didn't see the brilliance in Camilla's work. To them, she was just another woman trying to fit into their carefully constructed world. A world that ran on tradition, power, and privilege. As she stood in front of them, connecting her laptop to the projector, the silence was palpable. She glanced at the faces around the table, 5 men in expensive suits, each one heir to family fortunes, and Daniel, who sat at the head of the table with his $15,000 Mont Blanc pen, a symbol of everything he thought he was entitled to. He didn't look at her proposal. He didn't look at the figures or the projections. He didn't even try to understand what she had created. Instead, his eyes were on his pen, tapping rhythmically against the table. She was used to this. The dismissive stares. The polite but empty words, but Camilla wasn't about to back down. She had worked too hard for this moment. Gentlemen? She began, adjusting her glasses and setting the tone with a calm and steady voice. Our numbers show that we can not only survive this crisis, but we can double our profit margin in 18 months. These projections are based on data that no one else in the industry is talking about, but I believe they are key to the future. For 2 hours, she stood there presenting the most thorough, data-backed strategy any of them had ever seen. She explained how they could turn things around, how they could modernize their operations, and how they could lead the market in ways that no other company had dared to. But Daniel wasn't listening. He wasn't even pretending to listen. Instead, his eyes were on his watch, tapping his foot impatiently. She could feel the judgment in the air. She could feel it in the way they all looked at her, like she was an outsider, like her success wasn't earned. It was the same feeling she had experienced her whole life, being told she wasn't good enough, being told her ideas didn't matter, being told she didn't belong. When Camilla finished her presentation, the silence in the room was deafening. There was no applause, there was no recognition. Just a few murmurs of thank you and a couple of forced smiles. It was polite. It was professional. But it wasn't real. Daniel, with his fake smile, leaned back in his chair and looked at her, as if he were offering her some great favor. Thank you, Camilla, he said, his tone dripping with insincerity. We'll definitely consider your suggestions. And just like that, Camilla was dismissed. It wasn't about the ideas. It wasn't about the data. It wasn't about her. It was about the fact that she wasn't like them. She wasn't one of the privileged few who were born into the right families, who had access to the right circles, who understood the culture of Kirkwood Industries. The meeting was over, but Camilla wasn't done. She walked out of that room with her head held high, but inside something had snapped. She had been overlooked, undervalued, and underestimated. But instead of feeling defeated, she felt something else. Determination. 3 weeks later, Camilla watched in disbelief as Kirkwood Industries publicly announced a new expansion strategy. It was her strategy, word for word, slide for slide. But there was no mention of her, there was no credit. It was as though everything she had done had been erased. And to make matters worse, when she questioned it, Daniel called her into his office and, in his usual patronizing tone, told her that maybe it was time for her to look for something more suited to your profile. The implication was clear. She wasn't the right fit for the company. She was too intense, too assertive. It was a polite way of saying she didn't belong. The truth was, she was exactly what the company needed, but Daniel and the others couldn't see past their own biases. They couldn't see her worth. The next few months were a blur. Camila, feeling both betrayed and angry, did something she had never done before. She kept her head down, but her mind was working overtime. She wasn't going to let this slide. She wasn't going to walk away quietly, like so many others had before her. She would prove them wrong. She started building something of her own, quietly, carefully behind the scenes. Genesis Capital was born. It wasn't just about the money. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about proving that people like her could succeed, that people like her could create something bigger and better than the systems that had tried to hold them back. And as the months went by, Camila gathered a team, the best of the best, people who had been discarded by Daniel's company, people who had been written off because they didn't fit the culture of Kirkwood. They were brilliant professionals, black women, Latino men, women from every corner of the globe, and they all shared one thing in common. They had been overlooked, mistreated, and underestimated by Daniel Kirkwood and his team of executives. But now they were building something he could never have imagined. In the meantime, Daniel had no idea what was happening behind closed doors. He still thought he was untouchable. He still thought he could do whatever he wanted. After all, he was Daniel Kirkwood, the man who had inherited everything, the man who had created an empire based on his family's wealth and privilege. But what he didn't know was that his empire was already crumbling. The very people he had fired, ignored, or humiliated were now coming together to create something that would soon topple everything he had built. And the funny thing, Daniel had no idea who Camila really was or who she was becoming. All he saw was a woman who had been fired, a woman who had been put in her place. He didn't know she had been building an empire of her own, one that would soon change everything. As the weeks passed, Camila felt the weight of her decision to leave Kirkwood Industries. She had been dismissed, disregarded, and humiliated. But now, with Genesis Capital on the rise, every single setback only fueled her drive to succeed. She had always known that power, wealth, and influence didn't come easily, especially for someone like her. But now, with every contract signed and every investor secured, the tables were beginning to turn. Genesis Capital wasn't just another business, it was a vision. A vision that was coming to life slowly but surely, a vision that was built on the very values that Daniel Kirkwood had discarded. The foundation of Genesis was respect, equality, and competence. Unlike Kirkwood Industries, where a corporate culture of elitism and exclusion thrived, Genesis embraced diversity and talent from every walk of life. This wasn't just a business. This was an idea that was spreading, an idea that was taking root where Kirkwood had failed. Camila sat in her new office in Manhattan, looking out at the city skyline. It wasn't just a new beginning for her, it was a new world. A world where people like her, people who had been passed over, overlooked, and undervalued, could now rise. And with every day that passed, more and more talented professionals who had been discarded by Kirkwood found their place within her company. People who had been told they weren't good enough because they didn't fit the corporate culture. She had handpicked every person on her team, and each one of them was brilliant. From the former Kirkwood employees who had been unfairly fired, to the top talent from companies across the globe, Camila's team was a force to be reckoned with. What made them special wasn't just their skill, it was the fire in their eyes, the drive that had been sparked by the injustices they had endured, and there was something else. Every one of them knew what it was like to be underestimated, to be told they didn't belong. They knew what it felt like to be dismissed because of their background, their gender, or their race, but they didn't let it break them. They used it to fuel their fire. That fire burned brighter every day. And Daniel Kirkwood had no idea what was coming. Genesis Capital was growing quickly. The company was attracting the attention of investors who had been looking for an alternative to the old, outdated corporate structures that were failing them. They wanted something new, something fresh, something with heart, and Camila had built that. She knew she was ready. She knew it was time to show the world exactly what she had been working on. She had already built a network of clients who had been waiting for a leader like her. The contracts were flowing in, and her company was becoming a force in the industry. Genesis was offering something the corporate world had been lacking: inclusivity, diversity, and real solutions to problems that had been ignored for years. Daniel, on the other hand, was still coasting, still riding the wave of privilege that had been handed to him. He hadn't realized that the world around him was changing. The corporate world wasn't the same anymore, and his antiquated ways were no longer enough to sustain his empire. People like Camila, people who had been overlooked, were now rising up, taking what had been taken from them. And Daniel, oblivious to everything happening around him, had no clue that the woman he had fired was about to bring him down. As Camila watched the city unfold before her, she couldn't help but smile. The storm she had been quietly planning was just about to hit. And Daniel was right in the eye of it, completely unaware. The day had finally come. It was the day that would change everything. Camila walked into the boardroom with the same calm demeanor she had perfected over the past few months. Her leather briefcase felt heavier than it had ever before, not because of the weight of the papers inside, but because of what those papers represented. The contracts, the signatures, the promises, they all represented a culmination of everything she had worked for, everything she had lost. And now, everything she was about to gain. This meeting wasn't just any ordinary meeting. This was where Camila was going to show Daniel just how wrong he had been. She had worked for this moment, waited for it, and now, she was ready to strike. Genesis Capital was about to become the force that would dismantle everything Daniel had built. She didn't need to tear it down herself. All she had to do was show the world the truth about who he really was. Camila had been patient. She had been strategic. And now, as she stepped into that room, she could feel the power in her hands. She was no longer just a woman who had been fired, dismissed, and discarded. She was the CEO of a company that had far surpassed the one that had once rejected her. The boardroom at Kirkwood Industries was filled with the usual crowd. Daniel Kirkwood, surrounded by his team of executives, all in their expensive suits. But this time, there was something different in the air. Something had shifted, and they didn't even know it yet. Daniel, as usual, was sitting at the head of the table, wearing his smug, condescending smile. He introduced Camila as if she were just another consultant, another helpful outsider who was going to provide them with the solution they needed. He had no idea that she wasn't there to help them. She was there to expose everything he had done wrong. "Thank you, Daniel," Camila said calmly, not breaking eye contact. "I'm here to solve your problems. But first, let's start with some basic facts." She clicked on her laptop and the projector came to life. The first slide appeared, a simple title, but one that would shake the very foundation of Kirkwood Industries. "Over the last 18 months, she began, Kirkwood Industries has lost $52 million in contracts that were once guaranteed. The room fell silent. Everyone was staring at the screen, but no one dared to speak. Camila clicked to the next slide. The data was irrefutable. The decline in business, the missed opportunities, and the failed contracts. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what came next. Camila clicked again, and an audio recording began to play. It was a conversation Daniel had had with a potential client just a few months ago. His voice was clear, and every word echoed through the room. "We know our company doesn't have the same diversity as other companies," Daniel's voice said on the recording, "but that just means we have less drama and more focus on the job at hand." The room went deathly quiet. Every person in that room could feel the weight of Daniel's words. There was no turning back now. "You didn't think I would have the recordings, did you, Daniel?" Camila said, her voice calm but heavy with the weight of the truth. "You didn't think that the people you fired, the ones you thought didn't matter, would keep evidence of what you did." As the truth began to unfold before them, Camila knew the power had shifted. And this time, it wasn't in Daniel's hands. This part of the script shows Camila's growing power and the meticulous planning she's done to build Genesis Capital. It also begins the process of exposing Daniel's corruption, setting the stage for his inevitable downfall. Camila's calculated approach makes the story even more engaging, revealing how every piece of the puzzle has fallen into place. As Camila continued her presentation, the silence in the room deepened. There was no applause, no nods of agreement, only a tense, almost suffocating atmosphere. Daniel sat at the head of the table, his face visibly paling. His hands gripped the edge of the table, as if steadying himself from the truth that was rapidly unraveling around him. The truth he had spent years ignoring was now being shoved in his face, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Camila clicked on her laptop again, and the next slide appeared. It was an internal email that Daniel had sent to the entire board 2 years ago. She read it aloud, her voice steady, but her words cutting through the room with surgical precision. "We need to find a subtle way to clean up the department," she read. "Too much diversity is affecting our traditional dynamics. Especially that Camila, too assertive for a woman in her position." A murmur of shock rippled through the room. The executives shifted in their seats, their discomfort palpable. Some looked at Daniel as if hoping he would have an answer. Some just stared at their phones, not wanting to meet Camila's eyes. They knew exactly what that email meant, and they knew exactly what it meant for them. Camila didn't flinch. She didn't get angry, she didn't shout. She simply let the truth speak for itself. The words Daniel had typed so freely 2 years ago had now become the chains that would bind him. You see, Daniel, she continued, her eyes fixed on him, this was never about my assertiveness. It was about you trying to hold on to a world that didn't include people like me. People who have the ability to think outside your narrow box. You were so blinded by your privilege that you couldn't even see the talent in front of you. Daniel shifted in his chair, his face a mixture of anger and humiliation. His usual smugness was gone, replaced by something far less appealing. Panic. The walls he had built around his empire were crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Let's move on, Camilla said, clicking her laptop again. Let's talk about something that might surprise you. The next slide illuminated the room, a series of documents, official-looking contracts, and records of government bids. Daniel, she said with a cold smile, you've been lying on federal bids for the past 5 years. Inflating diversity numbers, using temporary employees and contractors, to cover up the fact that 92% of your leadership team is still made up of white men from wealthy families. There was no gasp from the room, no exclamations of disbelief. Only the unsettling feeling of a truth too deep to ignore. The evidence was there in black and white. The emails, the bids, the lies. And now, everyone in that room knew just how much Daniel had been willing to bend, break, and outright ignore the rules in his pursuit of power. You've been defrauding the government, Daniel, and you've been doing it for years. Camilla. Let the words sink in, watching the sweat gather on his brow. And that, my friend, could land you in prison. One of the executives at the table, a man whose face was twisted in shock, finally spoke up, breaking the silence. This is serious, Daniel. You could be looking at jail time for this. Camilla's eyes never left Daniel. She was watching him crumble, piece by piece, and she felt no sympathy. Not anymore. This was bigger than him. This was about something far more important, about proving that people like her, people who had been thrown away, could rise and take down the very system that tried to crush them. I'm not here to offer you sympathy, Daniel, Camilla sighed, her voice dripping with calm resolve. I'm here to show you what happens when you underestimate the people you've wronged. You thought you could get away with it because of your privilege. But let me tell you, you've made a very expensive mistake. Camilla clicked the slide again, and a new set of documents appeared. Contracts, emails, records of communications that Daniel had tried to delete or hide. Let's talk about the proposals you've stolen from me, she said, her voice now cutting through the room like a knife. The strategy that saved your company? That was mine, Daniel. Every single word, every single projection, every single idea was mine. You stole it, presented it as your own, and walked away with a multi-million-dollar bonus. And me? I got nothing. The room had fallen completely still. Even Daniel had. No words. His smug expression had been replaced by sheer terror. His hands were shaking slightly and his eyes were darting around, looking for an escape that wasn't there. This is the moment you realize, Daniel, Camilla said, her voice a low, deliberate whisper, that all the people you fired, all the people you belittled and ignored, they're coming for you. You're not going to get away with this. Not anymore. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle into the room. But you didn't think it would happen this way, did you? Camilla continued. You thought you were untouchable? You thought you could continue exploiting people, taking credit for their work and getting away with it? You didn't realize that your arrogance was your greatest weakness. You didn't realize that one day someone would be standing here, showing the world who you really are. Camilla let the silence hang in the air for a moment, giving everyone in that room a chance to absorb the magnitude of what had just been revealed. Daniel's empire was crumbling, and it was all because of his own actions. Because of his inability to see the value in people who didn't look like him, talk like him, or think like him. Now here's the twist, Camilla said, her eyes glinting with determination. I've built something much bigger than you. Daniel, something you can't touch. Genesis Capital is not just a consulting firm, it's a movement. A movement that was built on everything you tried to destroy. A movement that's going to change the corporate world forever. And you, well, you're going to be the example. Camilla's voice grew firmer, sharper. And here's the best part. Everything you thought you had built, everything you thought was yours, it's mine now. And it will be mine from here on out. She clicked on the final slide. The words Kirkwood Industries collapse flashed across the screen, followed by a list of companies and contracts that had been stolen from them, clients who had once worked with Kirkwood but now, thanks to Camilla's influence, had moved on to Genesis. The total value of these lost contracts was staggering, and the list of clients that had moved over to her firm was just the beginning. Genesis Capital was now more than just a competitor. It was a force that Daniel couldn't ignore. And every single person he had fired, every talented individual he had belittled, had become a part of this unstoppable machine. The room was tense. Camilla's final words hung in the air like a challenge. This is the beginning of the end for You, Daniel. Your empire is finished, and you have no one to blame but yourself. The room erupted into whispers. Some of Daniel's executives were staring at him, unsure of what to do. They had all known that something was wrong, but now they were being forced to confront the reality of just how deep Daniel's lies had gone. They had all benefited from his corruption, and now they had to decide whether to stand by him or run. Camilla turned to leave, her briefcase in hand. She didn't need to say anything more. The damage was done. She had shown them all what was really happening behind the scenes, the fraud, the lies, the stolen ideas, and the people Daniel had crushed along the way. Thanks for the coffee. Daniel, Camilla said, her voice colder than ever. It was the most expensive $5.80 you'll ever spend. And with that, she left the room, leaving Daniel behind, a broken man, stripped of everything he thought he had. The storm that had been building for months had finally hit, and there was no going back. The aftermath of that fateful meeting was swift and unforgiving. As Camilla stepped out of the boardroom, the weight of what had just unfolded sank in. She had done it. The years of humiliation, the sleepless nights, the quiet plotting, it had all led to this moment. The world she was building, the empire she was creating, was unstoppable now. But while her heart raced with the thrill of victory, her mind was focused on one thing: the destruction of Daniel Kirkwood. Outside, the streets of Manhattan felt like a blur as she walked toward her car. The city that had once been a symbol of her struggle now felt like her kingdom. Genesis Capital was thriving, and soon every person who had ever doubted her would see the impact of her work. The real revenge wasn't about making Daniel suffer in some petty way. It was about showing him and the world the power of those he had written off, the power of talent that didn't fit into his privileged world. But for now, she couldn't afford to bask in her success. The real battle was just beginning. Camilla had built something strong, something Daniel could never touch. Genesis Capital wasn't just a business, it was a movement that would change the corporate landscape forever. She had no time to waste. There was much more to do, and now, with the evidence in her hands, she was going to make sure Daniel Kirkwood paid the price for every wrong he had ever committed. Back in the boardroom at Kirkwood Industries, the fallout was already beginning. Daniel, still sweating, stared at the now empty chair that Camilla had just vacated. The other executives sat in stunned silence, unsure of what to do next. They had just witnessed the fall of the man who had controlled their lives for so long. And it was all thanks to Camilla, the woman they had all dismissed, the woman they had underestimated. Do you realize what just happened? One of the executives finally asked, his voice shaky. Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't. The gravity of what had just been exposed was too much for him to process. His entire career, everything he had built, was crumbling right before his eyes. It wasn't just about the stolen ideas. It wasn't just about the government contracts he had lied about. It was about the fact that he had underestimated the one person who had been the most capable of destroying him, Camilla Santos. For the first time in his life, Daniel felt small, he felt powerless. He had spent years at the top, riding high on the privilege that came with his last name, believing that nothing could touch him. But now, the very foundation of his empire was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The room was still silent as Daniel's mind raced. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but he didn't bother to look at it. He already knew what was coming. The investors were going to pull out. The clients were going to leave. And Kirkwood Industries? It was only a matter of time before the company would collapse entirely. The next day, Camilla sat in her office, looking over the contracts and financial documents that were piling up in front of her. Genesis Capital was already expanding, and the company was being flooded with offers from major clients. Word had spread quickly about the innovative consulting firm that had just brought down one of the largest corporations in the country. Camilla had already started to lay the groundwork for the next steps, expanding her team, scaling her business, and most importantly, ensuring that Kirkwood's fall wasn't just a momentary victory. It was the beginning of something much larger. A movement that would prove that competence, talent, and hard work could destroy the old guard of the corporate world. The people who had always been told they didn't belong, the ones who had been overlooked for decades, they were the future. And Camilla was the leader they had been waiting for. As she sat back in her chair, a text message popped up on her phone. It was from Marcus, one of her key partners at Genesis. Meeting with the board of Kirkwood confirmed. They want to discuss the future direction of the company. Thought you might want to know.